How many times do I have to tell you? You're just a maid. Stay out of our way.
I'm sorry, madam. It won't happen again.
Lina lowered her head and quietly continued cleaning the enormous mansion. Every day she worked from sunrise until late at night, hoping that someone would notice her kindness. But in the billionaire's house, she was treated as if she didn't exist. What nobody knew was that the family's only son, Daniel, had just landed back in Africa after studying overseas for 5 years. His return was
I'm
about to
sorry,
change
madam.
everything.
It won't happen again.
As the sun rose higher over the magnificent mansion, Lina quietly continued her daily chores. She carefully watered the colorful flowers, polished the marble floors, and prepared the guest rooms with the same care she gave every day. Although no one thanked her, she never complained. Deep inside, Lina still believed that kindness would one day be rewarded. At that very moment, a luxury black limousine slowly drove through the mansion's grand gates. The household staff immediately stopped what they were doing. The billionaire family's only son had finally returned home after 5 years abroad. The limousine came to a gentle stop. The rear door slowly opened. Lina looked up for just a second, and the first person Daniel's eyes landed on was her. The luxury limousine came to a gentle stop in front of the mansion. The driver quickly stepped out and respectfully opened the rear door. A handsome young man in an elegant black suit slowly stepped onto the marble driveway. It was Daniel, the billionaire family's only son, returning home after 5 years abroad. The servants smiled with excitement, while the billionaire couple rushed outside to welcome him. But before Daniel greeted anyone, his eyes wandered across the garden. They stopped on a young maid quietly holding a basket of fresh flowers. For a brief moment, the entire world seemed to stand still. Lina quickly looked down and walked away, but Daniel couldn't stop watching her. He quietly asked himself, "Who is she?" Daniel couldn't forget the kind young maid he had seen in the flower garden. While his parents proudly showed him around the mansion, his eyes kept searching for her. Meanwhile, Lina quietly carried a basket of freshly washed clothes toward the backyard, hoping to finish her work before anyone noticed her. She had no idea that someone was already looking for her. As Lina walked through the peaceful flower garden, she accidentally dropped one of the white towels onto the path. Before she could bend down to pick it up, someone reached it first. Their eyes met once again. For the first time in years, someone smiled at Lina with genuine kindness. Before Daniel could say a single word, a loud voice suddenly shouted from behind them, "Lina, what do you think you're doing?" The angry voice belonged to Madame Victoria, Daniel's wealthy mother. She stormed into the garden with a furious expression and immediately pulled Daniel away from Lina. Without asking what had happened, she blamed Lina for disturbing her son. The other servants watched in silence as Lina lowered her head, trying to hide the tears forming in her eyes. Daniel couldn't believe what he was seeing. That evening, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the lonely maid. He walked onto the mansion's balcony and looked down at the quiet garden where they had met. Something about Lina's kindness stayed in his heart. For the first time, Daniel realized he wanted to know the real person behind the maid's uniform. The next morning, Daniel made a decision that would shock everyone in the mansion. He walked straight toward the kitchen, looking for Lina. Early the next morning, the mansion was peaceful as the first rays of sunlight filled the kitchen. Lina quietly prepared breakfast for the family, carefully arranging fresh fruit and warm bread on elegant silver trays. Just as she was about to leave, Daniel walked into the kitchen. Every servant stopped working in surprise. No one had ever seen the billionaire's son enter the servants' kitchen before. Daniel politely thanked Lina for preparing breakfast. She froze in surprise. In all the years she had worked in the mansion, no member of the billionaire family had ever thanked her. Before Lina could answer, Madame Victoria appeared at the kitchen door. Her smile instantly disappeared. Madame Victoria slowly walked toward them. She looked directly at Lina, then she said something that left the entire kitchen speechless. Madame Victoria slowly walked toward Daniel and Lina with a cold expression. Without even looking at her son, she snatched the breakfast tray from Lina's hands. Then, in front of everyone, she ordered Lina to leave immediately. The kitchen became completely silent. Daniel watched in disbelief as Lina quietly lowered her head and walked away. At that moment, he realized how unfairly she was being treated. A few minutes later, Lina sat alone in the quiet flower garden behind the mansion. She wiped away her tears and tried to smile, telling herself that tomorrow would be a better day. Unknown to her, Daniel had quietly followed her. Standing a few steps away, he watched her with sadness. His heart told him one thing: Lina deserves so much better. Daniel slowly took one step toward Lina. Just as he was about to speak, someone grabbed his shoulder from behind. Daniel slowly turned around after someone grabbed his shoulder. It was his father. With a serious expression, the billionaire quietly reminded Daniel that people from wealthy families should never become close to servants. Daniel listened respectfully, but deep inside, he knew Lina was different. As his father walked away, Daniel looked back toward the garden. Lina had already disappeared. Later that afternoon, Lina quietly visited the small servants' quarters behind the mansion. She sat beside the window, reading an old book that had always given her hope during difficult days. At that very moment, Daniel stood outside the small house, holding a single white rose. He took a deep breath. This time, he wasn't going to let her walk away. Daniel slowly raised his hand. Knock, knock. Lina looked toward the door. Her heart began to race. Lina slowly opened the cottage door, wondering who could possibly be visiting her. The moment she looked up, she froze. Standing in front of her was Daniel, holding a single white rose with a warm, genuine smile. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The quiet afternoon breeze gently moved through the flower garden as they simply looked at each other. It was the first time anyone had ever come to visit Lina. Daniel offered Lina the white rose as a simple gift of friendship. She accepted it with trembling hands, unable to hide her surprise. For the first time in many years, Lina felt seen, respected, and appreciated. But from an upstairs balcony of the mansion, Madame Victoria had witnessed everything. Her face slowly filled with anger. Madame Victoria immediately picked up her phone. She made one short call. Come to the mansion immediately. We need to get rid of that maid. Only a few minutes after the phone call, a luxurious black SUV drove through the mansion gates. A well-dressed woman stepped out with a confident smile. She was Vanessa, the daughter of one of the billionaire family's closest business partners. Madame Victoria welcomed her with a warm hug. Deep inside, she had already decided Vanessa would become Daniel's future wife. Lina quietly watched from a distance, unaware that her peaceful life was about to change forever. That evening, the family gathered for an elegant dinner. Madame Victoria proudly introduced Vanessa to Daniel, hoping they would become closer. Daniel greeted her politely, but his attention drifted toward the kitchen. There, Lina quietly served dinner before disappearing once again. Daniel couldn't stop wondering why the kindest person in the mansion always seemed to be the loneliest. Later that night, Daniel quietly left the mansion carrying a small gift box. He was heading toward the servant's cottage, but someone was secretly following him in the darkness. Under the quiet moonlit sky, Daniel carefully walked toward the small servant's cottage with a beautifully wrapped gift box in his hands. He wanted to thank Lina for her kindness and courage despite everything she had endured. As he approached the cottage, he smiled, imagining how happy she would be. But hidden behind the flower bushes, Vanessa quietly watched every step Daniel took. She couldn't understand why the billionaire's son was secretly visiting a maid. Lina gently opened the cottage door after hearing a soft knock. Daniel smiled and handed her the small gift box. With trembling hands, Lina slowly opened it. Inside was a beautiful silver necklace shaped like a tiny heart. Tears filled her eyes. Before she could thank him, a camera flashed brightly from the darkness. Vanessa looked at the photo. A slow smile appeared on her face. She whispered, "Now I have exactly what Madame Victoria needs." Early the next morning, Vanessa walked confidently into Madame Victoria's private office. Without saying a word, she placed her phone on the desk and showed her the photos from the previous night. Madame Victoria's smile slowly disappeared. Her face filled with anger as she looked at Daniel giving the heart-shaped necklace to Lina. At that very moment, she made a decision that would change Lina's life forever. Outside, Lina happily continued her work, completely unaware of what was happening inside the mansion. She gently touched the beautiful heart-shaped necklace hidden beneath her apron and smiled quietly. It was the first gift she had ever received, but as she walked toward the garden, two security guards suddenly appeared in front of her. Their serious expressions made her heart skip a beat. One of the guards took a deep breath and spoke. "Lina, Madame Victoria wants to see you immediately." Lina took a deep breath and quietly followed the two security guards toward Madame Victoria's private office. Every step felt heavier than the last as her heart raced with fear. The mansion's servants stopped working and silently watched her pass through the grand marble hallway, whispering among themselves. Lina had never been summoned to the billionaire's private office before. and deep inside she felt that something terrible was about to happen. As Lina entered the office, Madame Victoria stood beside her enormous desk with a cold expression while Vanessa watched with a satisfied smile. Without giving Lina a chance to explain anything, Madame Victoria placed the photo of Daniel giving her the silver heart-shaped necklace on the desk. Lina's eyes widened with shock, realizing someone had secretly photographed the moment. The room became silent as Madame Victoria prepared to make a decision that could change Lina's future forever. Madame Victoria slowly picked up the photo, then looked directly into Lina's eyes. "Pack your things." Lina's heart sank the moment she heard Madame Victoria's cold words. Without raising her voice, Madame Victoria ordered Lina to pack her belongings and leave the mansion before sunset, insisting that a maid had no place in her son's life. Lina tried to explain that she had never asked Daniel for anything and had only accepted his kindness out of respect. But Madame Victoria refused to listen. Vanessa stood quietly beside her with a satisfied smile, believing her plan had finally succeeded. With tears rolling down her cheeks, Lina slowly returned to the small servant's cottage and began folding her few clothes into an old suitcase. Every corner of the little room held memories of the years she had faithfully served the family. As she prepared to leave without saying goodbye, Daniel hurried back to the mansion after hearing the shocking news from one of the servants. The moment he saw Lina standing outside the cottage with her suitcase, he froze in disbelief. Daniel rushed toward Lina. Then, for the first time in front of everyone, he loudly said, "She isn't leaving this mansion." Daniel rushed across the garden and stood between Lina and the mansion gates before she could leave. The servants stopped working, and even the security guards froze in surprise. Looking directly at his parents, Daniel firmly declared that Lina had done nothing wrong and deserved to be treated with respect. For the first time in his life, he openly disagreed with his family, leaving everyone in complete shock. The atmosphere became completely silent as Daniel gently picked up Lina's suitcase and placed it back beside the cottage. Lina could hardly believe what was happening. While Madame Victoria's anger grew stronger with every passing second, Vanessa watched with frustration as her carefully planned scheme began falling apart. Unknown to everyone, the billionaire father quietly observed the scene, and for the first time, he started questioning whether they had judged Lina unfairly all these years. Just then, the billionaire father slowly stepped forward and said, "Daniel, come with me. We need to talk, alone." Daniel followed his father into the mansion's private study, expecting another warning to stay away from Lina. Instead, the billionaire calmly asked him a simple question: "Why are you willing to risk everything for a maid?" Daniel looked into his father's eyes and honestly explained that Lina wasn't just a maid to him. She was kind, humble, hardworking, and had a heart that was more valuable than all the family's wealth. For the first time, the billionaire father remained silent, thoughtfully reflecting on his son's words. Outside, Lina quietly continued watering the flowers, believing her time at the mansion was almost over. She smiled gently despite the uncertainty, refusing to let bitterness change her kind heart. From a nearby balcony, the billionaire father watched her without saying a word. As he saw the way she cared for every flower with patience and love, he began to realize that Daniel had seen something in Lina that the rest of the family had completely overlooked. As the billionaire father quietly turned away from the balcony, a servant hurried toward him carrying an old envelope. "Sir, I think you need to see this." The billionaire father slowly opened the old envelope with curiosity, while the servant waited quietly beside him. Inside were handwritten letters, certificates of appreciation, and several old photographs. As he looked through them, he discovered that years before joining the mansion, Lina had spent her free time caring for orphan children and helping elderly people in her village without expecting anything in return. Every letter described her as a young woman with an honest heart, and the billionaire's expression slowly changed from curiosity to deep respect. At the same time, Madame Victoria and Vanessa secretly met in the mansion's elegant lounge, believing their plan was almost complete. Neither of them knew that the billionaire father had just discovered the truth about Lina's character. As they confidently discussed how Lina would soon disappear from Daniel's life forever, the billionaire quietly walked toward the room, holding the envelope firmly in his hands. The billionaire father pushed the door open. He placed the envelope on the table. Then he looked at Madame Victoria and quietly said, "I think we've made a terrible mistake." The luxurious lounge became completely silent after the billionaire father's words. Madame Victoria and Vanessa looked at each other in confusion as he spread the letters and photographs across the table. One by one, he showed them proof of Lina's kindness, generosity, and years of helping people in need. The more Madame Victoria read, the more uncomfortable she became. For the first time, she began to realize that she had judged Lina based on her position in society instead of the person she truly was. Meanwhile, unaware of the dramatic conversation taking place inside the mansion, Lina spent the afternoon helping an elderly gardener repair damaged flower beds after a strong windstorm. Even though she was facing the possibility of losing her job, she continued helping others without expecting anything in return. From a nearby balcony, Daniel watched the scene with admiration, while his father quietly joined him. As they observed Lina's kindness, the billionaire father finally understood why his son cared about her so deeply. That evening, the billionaire father called an emergency family meeting. Everyone, including Lina, was ordered to attend. As the sun began to set, every member of the household gathered inside the mansion's magnificent grand hall. After the billionaire father's unexpected announcement, the room was filled with curiosity and tension as servants, security guards, Daniel, Madame Victoria, Vanessa, and Lina stood together wondering why they had all been called. Holding the old envelope in his hands, the billionaire father slowly walked to the center of the room. His calm expression made everyone realize that something important was about to happen. Breaking the silence, the billionaire father revealed everything he had discovered about Lina's past. He spoke about her years of helping orphan children, caring for elderly people, and living with kindness even when life had been unfair to her. As every servant listened with admiration, Madame Victoria slowly lowered her head in shame. Daniel looked proudly at Lina, while tears quietly filled her eyes, because for the first time since arriving at the mansion, someone had publicly recognized the goodness in her heart. The billionaire father slowly turned toward Madame Victoria, then he quietly said, "There is something you need to say to Lina, in front of everyone." The entire grand hall fell silent as Madame Victoria slowly stepped forward. For several moments, she couldn't find the courage to speak. Looking into Lina's tearful eyes, she finally admitted that she had judged her because she was poor instead of taking the time to know her heart. In front of her family, the servants, and every employee in the mansion, Madame Victoria sincerely apologized for every unkind word and every unfair decision she had made. Everyone watched in complete silence as Lina stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. Before Lina could respond, Daniel gently walked to her side and stood beside her in front of everyone. With quiet confidence, he reached for her hand and held it without hesitation. The grand hall filled with surprise as the billionaire father smiled proudly, realizing his son had chosen love over status. Vanessa lowered her head, accepting that Daniel's heart had never belonged to her. At that moment, Lina finally understood that she was no longer standing alone. Daniel took a deep breath, still holding Lina's hand. He looked at his parents and said, "There is something I want to ask," in front of everyone. Still holding Lina's hand, Daniel stepped to the center of the grand hall and looked directly at his parents. With complete confidence, he told everyone that wealth could buy a beautiful mansion, expensive cars, and luxury clothes, but it could never buy a kind and genuine heart. He admitted that Lina had changed his life, teaching him the true meaning of humility, compassion, and unconditional love. The room fell silent as every person realized they were witnessing a life-changing moment. Daniel slowly reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small velvet ring box. Everyone gasped as he knelt before Lina with a warm smile filled with hope. Lina covered her mouth in complete surprise while tears streamed down her cheeks. The billionaire father smiled proudly. Madame Victoria clasped her hands with emotion, and even the servants struggled to hold back their tears. It was a moment that no one inside the mansion would ever forget. Daniel looked into Lina's eyes, then with the entire mansion watching, he asked the most important question of his life. Lina stood speechless. The grand hall remained completely silent as Daniel waited patiently on one knee. Tears streamed down Lina's face as she looked around the room, remembering every painful day she had spent feeling invisible inside the mansion. Looking back at Daniel, she realized that his love had given her something she had never dreamed of: hope. With a trembling smile, Lina gently nodded her head and softly accepted Daniel's proposal. Instantly, the hall erupted with joyful applause as smiles filled every face. Overcome with emotion, Madame Victoria slowly walked toward Lina and embraced her for the very first time. She welcomed her into the family with a sincere smile, while the billionaire father proudly placed his hand on Daniel's shoulder. The servants cheered as the mansion that had once been filled with loneliness became a home filled with love, forgiveness, and new beginnings. 6 months later, the entire mansion was decorated with thousands of beautiful flowers. Today was the day everyone had been waiting for. 6 months later, the magnificent billionaire mansion was transformed into a breathtaking wedding venue filled with colorful flowers, elegant decorations, and smiling guests from across the country. The young maid who had once been ignored by everyone now walked proudly down the aisle wearing a beautiful white wedding gown. As Daniel waited with tears of happiness, every person in the mansion realized that true love is never measured by wealth or social status, but by the goodness of the heart. As the sun slowly set behind the mansion, Daniel and Lina stood together surrounded by their family and friends, grateful for the incredible journey that had brought them together. The mansion that once echoed with loneliness was now filled with laughter, music, and love. Their story became a reminder that kindness, forgiveness, and a sincere heart can change even the hardest hearts, proving that true love always finds its way. Never judge a person by their position in life. A kind heart is the greatest treasure anyone can have.